Papua New Guinea should be one of the South Pacific's richest nations. But corruption is keeping many of its people in poverty.
There's a lot of corruption still going on right now as we speak.
Everything's open to abuse.
And to make it worse, Australia has been reluctant to help.
Australia is increasingly becoming the Cayman Islands in the Pacific for harbouring proceeds of crime from Papua New Guinea.
The land of paradise lost. Welcome to Four Corners. Imagine your reaction to a credible report revealing that 1/4 of the Australian government's entire domestic budget was being siphoned off corruptly. More than likely, it would be one of profound shock and incredulity, followed closely by profound anger. Well, that's one picture tonight's report presents about the state of affairs in our closest neighbour, Papua New Guinea, a country to which Australia provides more than $500 million a year in aid funding. So not only is Australian taxpayer-funded aid being used to fill some of the gaps left by local corruption, but there's also strong feeling amongst corruption fighters in Papua New Guinea that authorities here have been indifferent to the way Australia has become a repository for illegal money siphoned off from the people of Papua New Guinea. Now the Prime Minister, Peter O'Neill, has shocked his nation and the international business community, flagging legislation to incorporate the massive Ok Tedi copper mine into a government-run national financial trust. His justification for adding Ok Tedi to a trust that will contain most of the country's resource projects is simply that it will reduce the risk of corruption. But there's an equally strong view that it could have the opposite effect. Marian Wilkinson went north to investigate.
The eastern highlands of Papua New Guinea is still called by some the land of paradise. Today, the people of paradise are waiting, not for the arrival of God, but for their Prime Minister. Peter O'Neill has come here to attend one of the biggest religious festivals in this devoutly Christian country. He has a message for the faithful.
Big money give me plenty blessing. Last 40 years, you may work on mismanaging me go come. Next 40 years, you may must send him to slow. Thank you and God bless him, you blogger.
He is promising to fight the mismanagement and rampant corruption that has crippled Papua New Guinea for decades.
Some of our own members of parliament have been arrested or charged and they're before courts. Some of our own ministers have been investigated as we speak. Nobody has been protected by this government, and I can assure you that we are committed to this fight that we started.
25% of the budget is lost through detectable corruption.
Detectable corruption?
Yes.
That's 1/4 of your budget?
Yes, yes.
O'Neill has now enlisted Australia's help in the fight against corruption. But O'Neill himself is a long-time player in PNG politics. And some question just how serious he is about tackling corruption at the top.
The public are going to be watching him closely.
Thank you.
They know that his track record is not squeaky clean. He knows they know that it's not squeaky clean. He knows that he's got to somehow be able to deliver.
In a cheerless office in Port Moresby, the man charged by the Prime Minister with investigating high-level corruption is working hard to deliver. So far, Sam Coyme's Task Force Sweep has 27 cases waiting to go to trial. But he has met with tough resistance.
Physical threats, all manner of threats, you can name it.
Earlier this year, Coim was forced to abandon his city offices after they came under attack.
There were 20 plus men, masked men, came in the night, got the guards tied up, and they ransacked the entire office, destroyed files and everything they can find.
Coim is undaunted. He says corruption is robbing ordinary people of money for basic services.
Roads that's supposed to link the country, the hospitals that's supposed to be built, all manner of things happen, and people are dying of curable diseases.
Among the hundreds of cases on Coim's desk, one in particular has caused deep ructions in Australia.
We're looking at least 4.2 million Australian dollars that is involved. And as a result of that, we had to go. And secondly, it involves a school.
These are my students from 12C in 1976.
The school in question is Kerabat High School. And Sam Coim's investigation had its unlikely origins in the Sydney home of a retired teacher.
I was educating future lawyers and doctors and nurses and teachers, judges.
Barbara Short taught at PNG's Kerabat High for years. So when she heard it had fallen into disrepair, she joined her ex-students and teachers to campaign for its restoration.
Something had to be done.
She was delighted 4 years ago when the PNG government announced a multi-million-dollar contract to rehabilitate the school. But her joy was short-lived.
Well, I developed a big email list of past students, and I had about 75 students on it. And I was getting replies from them, and they were very, very upset, very angry and very annoyed that this money that was there, put aside for fixing up Kerabat, had disappeared.
Kerabat sits in a valley on the island of New Britain, an hour's drive from Rabaul, the old provincial capital. Rabaul was almost destroyed by volcanic eruptions in 1994.
Let us sing with the joyful hearts, for we are young and free.
Kerabat High was unscathed by the eruptions, but it's been deeply scarred by this corruption scandal.
Kerabat National High School.
When Headmaster Reem Allo arrived at Kerabat last year, the whole school had been shut down.
It's one of the worst experiences in my life. I've been in the system for the last 15 years, in the national high school system. Unforgettable. Worst experience, in fact.
A contractor who was paid millions to repair the school's sewerage, water and dormitories had left the campus uninhabitable. Before he could reopen the school, the headmaster was forced to install 2 big septic tanks to deal with a sewage emergency at the dormitories.
That took me about 20 days.
Wow.
That's day and night.
After the failure of the contractor, Australian aid money was allocated to fix the sewerage and water. AusAid was already renovating the classrooms.
I should say that was really kind of a divine intervention. I couldn't have really operationalized the school without the AusAid's assistance.
Mr. Allo won't talk on camera about the local contractor, who is now under investigation by Task Force Sweep. But others will. You were there on the spot. What was the problem with the work that was being done?
The work was not completed. Yes. When we would inquire why certain things were not being done, we were told that we had no right to speak. And so, although 10 million is supposed to have been spent on maintenance of the dormitories, water and sewage, the job had not been done.
Liliana High was the previous principal of Kiribat High. She resigned after giving a report on the contractor's shoddy work to her superiors. But when her report appeared in a national newspaper, Ms. High discovered the contractor was an extremely powerful businessman.
So I gave a report of jobs that had not been done. And after what I had said went to the media, I was threatened by the lawyer of the contractor.
This was Mr. Watoto.
That's right, to take me to court if I did not apologize in the Post-Courier for 2 weeks and say that the jobs were well done.
What did you do?
I was very scared. You know, I had never received such threats.
Yeah, about those, and then... The contractor, Eramus Watoto, is a big man in PNG. He was also mates with the former planning minister, whose department awarded him multi-million-dollar contracts for Kiribat School and many other government projects.
I'm one of those businessmen that had a lot of business transactions with the government those times.
Watoto agreed to talk to Four Corners to defend himself from charges that he defrauded the government in these contracts. Of the 62 million kina that you got in contracts, are you saying that none of it was ripped off, that none of it was fraudulently used?
No. 62 million is what? 27 million Aussie? We started an airline, we dropped some ships, we did some plantations.
And you think the school, do you think the work there was...
The work there was done. And like I said, if you have any complaint, address it through the contract.
So what about the complaints of the school council?
I don't think the school council complained. They were happy with the work.
The Minister for Education was informed by the chairman of the governing council that the jobs had not been completed and that the contractor should not be leaving.
And did he complete it?
No.
Watoto was charged with fraud over the Kiribat School contract 2 years ago. But he got bail, and in an extraordinary development, Watoto was allowed to leave PNG for Australia.
The most wanted man, eh?
This was despite a request from PNG police to bar him from coming.
My lawyers were attending every day.
Watoto had an Australian 457 visa. The head of Task Force Sweep says the prosecution of Watoto was delayed for well over a year as a result.
This is before the court, so I can't comment any further.
We had all the other charges lining up, but we couldn't lay it on him because he absconded jurisdiction, so we really had complications.
Because he was able to travel on an Australian visa?
Yes, he was too sick to come to PNG, as deposed in some of the affidavits that were produced in court. But the evidence that was available was that he was travelling to other countries using that visa.
Like many wealthy Papua New Guineans, Eramus Watoto was a frequent visitor to Cairns in far north Queensland, where he has invested heavily. He owns a hire car company, holiday apartments, and several houses. Indeed, his family has lived in Cairns for years. The Australian government finally cancelled Watoto's 457 visa in May this year. This was after a court order froze his properties as possible proceeds of crime, a charge he denies.
Those items on those properties are not any of the crime, as I said. They were largely, materially financed by ANZ. How could it be part of any money laundering? So I still got businesses down there. I still got trade creditors down there to sort out. And I just don't know what's the real reasoning behind pulling my 457.
Watato's visa was cancelled after the head of Task Force Sweep pressured Australia for months. Coyne was deeply frustrated with Australia, not just over the Watato case.
Guys, let's go.
He believed government agencies were ignoring evidence of money laundering in Australia by corrupt PNG figures.
The families are down in Australia. They have properties down there. They gamble heavily in Australian casinos. They bring money from Papua New Guinea down to Australia. And the evidence is in they use Australian bank accounts to launder PNG corruptly obtained money.
Coyne decided to put a rocket up the Australian authorities. And last October, he had the perfect opportunity. An invitation to Sydney to speak at a high-level conference hosted by AUSTRAC, Australia's agency for investigating money laundering. Behind closed doors, Coyne stunned Australia's bureaucrats and bankers.
What I said was that Australia continues to harbour proceeds of crime from Papua New Guinea, and also sometimes criminals who run away and abscond jurisdiction also find a safe place in Australia. So to that extent, I said Australia is increasingly becoming the Cayman Islands in the Pacific for harbouring proceeds of crime from Papua New Guinea. That's the description I gave.
And what was the reaction?
I got mixed reactions, and people, it was for the first time as I could feel that someone has actually bluntly described Australia like that, and I could see reactions on their faces.
Were they shocked?
Some of them were really shocked.
Neither AUSTRAC nor Australia's banks were willing to be interviewed about the serious issues raised in Sam Coyne's speech. Back in Port Moresby, people campaigning against corruption for years were gratified by Coyne's speech.
Hello.
Hi, Mr. Stevens. Good afternoon.
The head of Transparency International in Moresby, Lawrence Stevens, has long argued Australia must address its role in the laundering of corrupt money from PNG.
There's large amounts of real estate held in Australia which one would have thought could have been questioned earlier.
Held by PNG politicians and officials?
Held by people who've held leadership roles in Papua New Guinea, both elected and employed, and questionable amounts of money involved in those holdings. Luckily, the federal police are now being asked why they haven't been paying sufficient attention to it. And these are examples from the United States.
Transparency International rates every country in the world on its Corruption Perception Index.
Fantastic.
Papua New Guinea is close to the bottom.
The people only just ahead of us are places like Syria. The people with us are countries like Eritrea and Guinea-Bissau.
It signals that corruption is taking a terrible toll on the government's budget for basic services.
We do draw a connection from one to the other. And when important people die in the Port Moresby Hospital for lack of basic facilities like oxygen, we wonder why the alarm bells aren't ringing. We see this right across the country. We hear complaints from many, many places.
Less than an hour from downtown Moresby is 8 Mile Settlement. Here, there is no sewerage, no health clinic, and no schools. This is a community of some 20,000 people. Most settled here illegally years ago to find work in the city. Women still line up at a communal tap because there is no running water at home. How long has it been like this with no proper water?
For the last 20 to 25 years.
Throughout Papua New Guinea, preventable diseases are still widespread. Maternal deaths in childbirth are amongst the highest in the world, and the child mortality rate has not improved for 20 years. This is your daughter?
Yes.
What do you hope her life will be in the future?
In the future, well, looking at the situation that I'm living now in this area, I feel sorry for my kids' future because the future doesn't look bright.
The World Bank cites corruption as one of the key reasons why basic services like health are still so poor.
Was this the guy who
Now, even those accused of corruption are pointing the finger at others, including politicians and high-level officials.
Well, there's a lot of corruption still going on right now as we speak.
How corrupt do you think these bureaucrats and politicians
Very corrupt.
In
very
PNG are?
corrupt. I'm saying this is the cancer. The cancer has gone bad, really bad. There is no more need for radiotherapy. We need some major cleanup. That I can tell you.
And you know that?
I know that.
One corruption scandal towers above the others, and it swept up all sides of PNG politics. The scandal began here in the Department of Finance, where they write the government's cheques. A judicial inquiry found it had improperly paid out over 250 million Australian dollars to settle largely bogus legal claims against the government.
People colluded apparently to steal money. People put phony court cases, charges up against government and did backroom settlements. Almost anything you can think about was going wrong, and when you see the places around Papua New Guinea that are missing out on development because of this, you know that there's something extreme.
The finance scandal came to a head under the previous Prime Minister, Sir Michael Somare, who was forced to set up the judicial inquiry. But as soon as the sensational findings were tabled by Somare in 2010, they were suppressed by a court order. The current Prime Minister told us the report is still suppressed.
The judiciary has obviously, through a court order, restricted anybody from interfering with this particular report. So that is why the governments have been in the past restricted, and this government has been restricted. What we have done is this government has now taken that matter up with the courts. Our Attorney General is attending to that as we speak, and I believe that we have a strong, arguable case to allow that this report become public.
The report clearly speaks of people who need to be charged, who need to be examined by the courts, a whole range of things, and ministers sitting on top of the organisations, not exercising the responsibility that they're paid to organise, or, as some people suspect, possibly even colluding in the loss of funds.
One key figure named in the report is the same man who successfully got the courts to suppress the report for 3 years. He is Paul Paraka, a lawyer with a vast network of political influence.
How powerful is Mr. Paraka?
Those are details that I can't comment on.
If I put to you that he is a very well-connected man in this country, would that be accurate?
Yes.
The Finance Inquiry report found Paraka received millions in government fees in the legal claims scandal. But it also found senior government officials in the Departments of Finance and Justice had colluded in the scandal. We tried to meet with Paul Paraka at his law firm in Port Moresby, but we found him extremely media shy. Our requests for an interview to address the serious allegations against him were rejected.
Mr. Speaker, and I have evidence before me.
You have evidence, but I need to check it out because I received it. Just I was coming in, I received it.
There is no order barring me to ask questions on the floor of Parliament. Parliament is a supreme authority. We need to discuss and debate corruption at the highest level in this country.
Thank you.
In May this year, PNG's opposition leader attacked Prime Minister O'Neill in Parliament over the Paraka scandal.
Whatever purported court order is referring to.
The previous government had got a court order to stop any further payments to Paraka's law firm after he was exposed.
I will allow you to ask the question this morning.
The opposition demanded to know if O'Neill's government had secretly paid Paul Paraka's firm over $31 million last year in breach of that court order.
Can the Prime Minister confirm or deny that a law firm called Paul Paraka Lawyers has any current and valid contract or retainer agreement with the independent state of Papua New Guinea or legal services?
We have already taken action on this matter when it came to light that Paul Paraka has been getting payments without proper clearance from the Attorney General's office. We have instructed Task Force Sweep. We have asked for Australian Federal Police. We have asked for Interpol to assist our own policemen and women in investigating this matter. I have suspended the Secretary for Finance. I have suspended the Deputy Secretary. I will go down as far as second the cleaner if I have to clear this mess once and for all.
But O'Neill was stunned when the opposition produced an incriminating letter about Paraka's fees, purportedly signed by the Prime Minister. The letter, dated January last year, ordered the Finance Secretary to have all the outstanding legal bills owed to Paraka lawyers settled forthwith.
There is a suggestion in the Paraka case.
But the Prime Minister told Four Corners the letter is a forgery.
The letter was addressed to the Secretary. I don't write to secretaries. I write to the Minister, and the Minister then addresses the Secretary of that particular department. So when we considered all these facts, it was obvious to us that it has been tampered with.
Task Force Sweep launched a major investigation into the allegations against Paraka. Last week, it charged a Deputy Secretary of the Finance Department. But Paraka is fighting Sam Coyne through the courts.
We haven't charged him yet. The allegations are that he obtained payments from the Finance Department for some legal fees that he did not deserve, and the Prime Minister actually laid a complaint with respect to those allegations for us to investigate, and we're investigating, so that's where we are at the moment.
In pursuit of Paraka, Task Force Sweep got a search warrant for the law firm's financial records. Paraka insists the payments to his firm were legal. Coyne says the investigation has so far revealed some $127 million was paid to Paraka's firm in breach of the court order.
From the information that is available to us, his family is in Australia.
Whereabouts?
I wouldn't know the details.
But he does have family in Australia?
Yes.
Documents show Paraka's law firm in Moresby transferred millions of dollars to Australia. The payments went to his family on the Gold Coast and to an apartment at Star City Casino in Sydney.
According to the limited information I have, the accounts have not been frozen, Australia. And what I do know is that a couple of These transactions were refused in March by National Australian Bank.
The National Australia Bank would not be interviewed, but told Four Corners some PNG customer accounts had recently been closed and some payments declined. Australia is stepping up its cooperation, according to PNG's Prime Minister.
We have been talking at the government level with the Australian government in assisting us with the Australian Federal Police in investigating some of these cases. And they are under current investigation, that I can assure you. And that we are able to, in fact, put a placement on some accounts, both in Australia and in Papua New Guinea. And in fact, we are very encouraged by the commitment that the Australian Federal Police has given to us.
Last year, when Peter O'Neill used his election campaign to attack corruption, there were those who questioned his commitment. They pointed to O'Neill's past, when he himself was a target of a corruption probe. In downtown Port Moresby, there is a building that still casts a shadow over Peter O'Neill's own political integrity. The gleaming Deloitte Tower is a monument to professional accountancy. But 12 years ago, a scandal engulfed this building. The inquiry that followed slammed Peter O'Neill, then a prominent businessman, on several government boards.
He's always argued that he has nothing to answer for, but clearly the inquiry found that some people did have things to answer for. Clearly the building cost a lot more than it should have done.
The inquiry began after thousands of Papua New Guinea employees lost over $64 million in savings in the country's largest superannuation fund, the National Provident Fund. The final report in 2002 found risky investments had ravaged workers' super savings. But it also uncovered fraud and money laundering involved in several investments, including the Deloitte Tower. The report was bad news for Peter O'Neill. It found that the builder of the Deloitte Tower had paid kickbacks to fund officials. It also found that some of those kickbacks were laundered through Peter O'Neill's business. In a damning finding, the report recommended that O'Neill be referred for investigation over the fraud and for perjury charges. But O'Neill rejected the findings, and a court in PNG dismissed the case against him.
A National Provident Fund inquiry was motivated literally by politics. And of course, there were some issues about management at the National Provident Fund. But it is the only report that has been prosecuted as far as the courts. In fact, I have appeared before the courts. Courts have found that there was no evidence to prosecute me. Listen, I've always stated very clearly, if there is new evidence out there that suggests that I have acted corruptly in my dealings with anybody, I'm answerable to the same laws like anyone else. So the challenge is on my critics and anyone who wishes to pursue this matter, that please produce new evidence. We will deal with it like any other citizen is subject to the laws of our country.
Breaking with the mismanagement and corruption of the past. On a recent visit to Goroka University in the Highlands, he promoted his ambitious plans for education and health. But O'Neill also has ambitious plans for managing Papua New Guinea's rich national assets. And These plans, say his critics, will severely test his anti-corruption credentials.
You can understand, in a way, what he's doing, but whether the mechanisms of accountability are in place, well, they're not in place. They've got to be built up, and there's a big risk factor.
The bird of paradise, called the kumul in Pidgin, is the national symbol of PNG. But the kumul could soon represent something very different. The O'Neill government wants to introduce legislation to put the nation's key national assets under the ownership of one body, called the Kumul Trust. The trust will hold the assets for the people of PNG. But the Prime Minister is expected to have a veto power over key decisions of that trust.
There'd be the overall Kumul Trust, which would
hold everything.
And the initial proposals that were presented was that all the present and past Prime Ministers would be the trustees, with the current Prime Minister having a veto role.
In the past, state-owned companies have been plagued by corruption. The Prime Minister argues his new Kumul structure will help prevent this.
All the boards will be independent. All the management will be very independent. Where the politicians, so to say, come into play is trustees. Because trustees have to be mandated by someone. So if it's not going to be the Prime Minister of the day, and if it's not going to be some of our senior leaders in the country, who do we put? They are merely a trustee shareholder, so that that entity can operate and ensure that it functions as a corporate entity.
But you will have an independent board that sits on that trust.
You have my word on it.
How much power
but critics
over
warn it
the
puts
country's
too much financial
assets would
power
that give
in too
the
few
Prime Minister?
hands?
What's the danger in doing this?
The danger could be that if the team decided that they really wanted to look after themselves rather than the broader interests of the nation, is that they could do extremely well for themselves and the nation could be severely shortchanged.
O'Neill's grand plans for the Kumul Trust sparked controversy when he launched a campaign to take over the giant Oktedi mine. The mine is one of the biggest money spinners in the PNG economy. The Oktedi mine caused massive environmental damage in Western Province when it was majority owned by BHP. As compensation for this damage, in 2002, BHP Billiton handed over its majority share in Oktedi to a not-for-profit trust. The trust was to benefit the people affected, according to the then Prime Minister.
At the time, I thought, given the environmental damage incurred and suffered by the people of Western Province, I thought that these shares would be a good idea to assign them to the people of Western Province.
Sir Makeri Murata is now chair of the not-for-profit trust. Called the PNG Sustainable Development Program, it was designed by Murata's government and BHP with strong protections against corruption.
Part of the program company was structured the way it is now and then registered in Singapore is that I feared in future that sticky, gluey hands will try to penetrate it.
But the O'Neill government wanted Oktedi in state hands under the Kumul plans. This confidential PNG cabinet paper shows the O'Neill government decided in July to consider unilateral action to expropriate the fund share of the Oktedi mine. It meant Peter O'Neill was willing to go head-to-head with BHP Billiton. The timing was fascinating. The decision came just one day before Peter O'Neill agreed to do a huge favour for the Australian Prime Minister.
Today, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea and I are announcing a major initiative to combat the scourge of people smuggling. As this regional resettlement arrangement is implemented and the message is sent loud and clear, back up the pipeline.
His planned takeover of Oktedi would provoke little reaction from Australia.
Well done, Peter. We want to take control of the management of the sustainable program. Our aim is to make sure that the sustainable program becomes the sovereign wealth fund for Western Province.
Hands of the state. O'Neill argued the not-for-profit trust had failed the people of Western Province.
Our aim is to make sure that the sustainable program becomes the sovereign wealth fund for Western Province. It dedicates itself to Western Province in attending to issues in health, education and law and order and infrastructure.
This marks a very sad day in the history of PNG. For the first time, the Prime Minister and the government expropriated assets owned by the people of Papua New Guinea in the Western Province. It's never happened before. It's a bad precedent.
The former Prime Minister is warning that the takeover of Oktedi could leave the billion-dollar mine open to rotting.
Once state takes the full ownership, Oktedi mine becomes a state-owned enterprise. And the sad history in Papua New Guinea, we know. Everything is open to abuse. So it's a gateway to abuse. Absolutely sure about that.
As Papua New Guinea's biggest aid donor, Australia has a vested interest in helping to fight corruption here. But for years, it's been a low priority for Canberra.
Let me not say turning the blind eye, okay. Let me say they haven't really looked. They've known it, but have ignored it.
Peter, good to see you. Thank you.
Under the new Abbott government, Peter O'Neill's asylum seeker deal is set to remain high on Canberra's agenda. As a result, any criticism of the O'Neill government's handling of corruption is likely to be muted. Peter O'Neill tells his people he is determined to fight corruption, that he will pursue those in government who steal from them.
You must learn him also me working plan the mistake. You must not talk about him. Yeah, mistake blow narvla man. No God, you must take him ownership blow this mistake. Now put him country blow you the right way, no right way country E7.
But as O'Neill consolidates his power, his commitment will be severely tested.
The Australian Government, the AFP and AUSTRAC all declined our request for an on-camera interview. They've provided a joint statement, which is on our website. Next week on Four Corners, two brave insiders blow the lid on a financial scandal that goes to the heart of one of Australia's most important and trusted institutions. Until then, good night.